So this is the beehive at New Zealand's parliament where, for the past nearly 6 years, Jacinda Ardern has resided as Prime Minister of the country. And in a few minutes' time, she's going to be walking out those doors for the very last time after a tumultuous career that's seen her attract worldwide fame, as well as her fair share of hate.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern stepped down almost 9 months before she would have been up for re-election, and her final exit was made with the warmth and kindness she swore to bring to office in the first place, something her senior ministers say she's delivered on.
How do you feel now that the Prime Minister is standing down and resigning?
There's a bit of a tear in the eye and a lot of emotion. Just the immense hope that she brought to a lot of people who had felt not listened to and excluded. So a lot of sadness and a lot of reflection, but also positivity about how we move forward and because of how much she's given us.
And what do you think are going to be the main things that New Zealanders remember Jacinda Ardern by? What's going to be her legacy?
I think she will always be remembered as a Prime Minister of immense empathy, who was there when we needed her and who gave us strength as a country. And I can absolutely tell you that at every single moment her focus has been on the well-being of New Zealanders.
Ardern hadn't been gone from Parliament for more than a few moments before she was formally replaced by one of her closest political allies.
Congratulations, Prime Minister.
This is the biggest privilege and responsibility of my life. I'm energised and excited by the challenges that lie ahead.
Ardern's resignation was shocking to most people and led to plenty of tributes, especially from powerful friends around the world who recognised her leadership style as refreshing and transformative. Ardern was elected in 2017 and has led New Zealand through crisis after crisis, from the explosion of a volcano on Vakari White Island to the attack on 2 mosques by white supremacists who murdered 51 Muslim worshippers. It took Ardern less than a month after that to ban assault-style weapons.
Events like this, these are not things New Zealand has ever experienced before. These kind of things don't happen here where we live. You know, we are a place that is peaceful, diverse.
But many people in New Zealand feel her time in office wasn't exactly kind.
Although Jacinda Ardern enjoys a fairly glowing global reputation as this shining star of compassionate leadership, a lot of people here in New Zealand don't necessarily feel that way. We're a few hours outside of Wellington right now in a farming community, and we're about to meet with a farmer who feels as though Ardern's time in power actually made life a little bit harder for him.
Ian Strawn raises sheep and cattle about 100 miles north of the capital.
Such a beautiful bit of land you're on.
Yeah, no, we like it. It produces a bit.
Duke.
These guys will end up steaks and stuff, and a bit of it will go into burgers, but yeah.
Strawn takes issue with a lot of the policies of Ardern's government, most of all a proposed tax on agricultural emissions.
What has Jacinda Ardern's time in office been like for the farming community?
She's been in charge of a government that's been very bad for our industry, agriculture. She's led probably the worst government, in my opinion, we've seen for 40 years. Certainly the most polarising I've ever seen. There's quite a lot of anger out there. As a farmer, we've got a highly uncertain environment now. We're not really sure about our future with the emissions taxes. We're getting dictated to from Wellington about all sorts of stuff that we can and can't do.
How do you think the international perception of Jacinda Ardern differs to how she's viewed here in New Zealand?
A lot of what she does is based around how things look. That's her strength. She's a great communicator, but you've got to have some substance behind it. She's thrown our industry under the bus to make herself look good overseas.
Compared to most places, New Zealand politics can be quite polite, and even opposition politicians are willing to throw Ardern a compliment.
So I've known her for a while. I mean, I really like her. She's a really good person.
But beyond the kind words are adamant criticisms. Chris Bishop says Ardern's time in office has mostly been about widespread policy failure, particularly in regards to the cost of housing. Bishop points to the thousands of people living in emergency accommodation like these motels.
When Jacinda Ardern and Labor won in 2017, there was huge optimism about what they would be able to accomplish. And well, if you fast forward to today, 5 years on, 4 times as many New Zealand children are living in cars as there were 5 years ago. The wait list for social housing, which is low-income housing, has gone up by 400%, now well over 20,000 people. You know, we have some of the most unaffordable houses in the developed world. There was all this optimism about the future, but things aren't actually any better. In fact, in a lot of cases, they're actually worse.
You feel like Jacinda Ardern failed on all counts?
Well, I think New Zealand is very proud of what she did on the world stage. It's domestically where her problems have arisen, and just the under-delivery on core things that she said she would tackle. There is this real disjunct between the kind of international perception of Jacinda Ardern and maybe what's happening here in New Zealand.
It's really true when they say it's actually pretty pain-free. Yeah, good.
One of Ardern's most praised decisions was in response to the pandemic, when New Zealand closed its borders for 29 months. There were next to no cases in the country and only a handful of deaths over nearly 2 full years. But her plans for reopening were much less popular. Resentment grew over vaccine mandates and led to one of the largest anti-government protests in New Zealand's history.
When I say government, you say must go. Government!
Over time, the attacks on Ardern became less about her policies and more about her as a person and as a woman. Personal attacks and gendered slurs against her piled up on the internet, and she received countless death threats.
Talking about the opposition today.
Political editor Jenna Lynch watched things turn.
This all raises the question, what would National do if it were elected?
How has some of that criticism that's been levelled against Jacinda Ardern become more targeted or toxic, particularly in the last 12 to 18 months?
I think she's always faced a level of misogyny, beginning around, her taking maternity leave to have a baby. And she was a young woman in a position of power. Prime Ministers always have abuse levelled at them, but she was getting death threats, and the language that was being used towards her just felt a lot more toxic.
How bad did it get?
I don't think she would have had a day where she didn't face a level of abuse that would be pretty hard to handle for most of us.
Why do you think she resigned now?
If we take her at her word, which I partly do, is she was tired. But also she could probably a little bit see the writing on the wall. The polls were going in all of the wrong direction. She could see that the public was probably falling out of love a little bit. Time to go.
It's true that Ardern's popularity was plummeting. Polls of her approval rating were at an all-time low before she stepped down, and even just walking down the street shows people's mixed feelings about her.
What did you guys think when Jacinda Ardern announced that she was going to be resigning as Prime Minister?
I feel like the Ardern, people hating on her and disliking her and whatnot, just picked up a whole lot over the last year or whatever. So I was pretty interested to see how she was going to go in the next election or whatever. But so I was definitely surprised, I guess.
I think ultimately though she has failed to properly deliver the change that was promised when she was first elected, and I think that's been the key to her decline over the last few years.
I think the way she cared about people, I think that was the thing that stood out the most for me, is she really cared about individuals, everyday people, and communicated that amazingly well.
Jacinda Ardern has always been reluctant to speak to most foreign media, something she stuck to even on her last public appearance as a leader.
Kia ora, Gavin Butler from Vice News. What's next for you, Prime Minister?
We're not going to do a stand-up. Thank you.
Oh, wow, you're amazing.
Thank you.
Oh, wow.
By stepping down, Ardern has seemingly tried to preserve her legacy by ensuring that the story of Jacinda Mania doesn't end with a crushing defeat at the polls.
That my overwhelming experience in this job of New Zealand and New Zealanders has been one of love, empathy, and kindness. thank you from the bottom of my heart for the greatest privilege of my life.
I'm Michael Learmonth, Editor-in-Chief of Vice News. Too often, traditional news outlets shy away from the real stories and experiences of those living through global conflicts. Not Vice News. Our reporters are on the ground, fearlessly covering the human stories that shape our world. You and millions of others can continue to read, watch, and listen to Vice News for free. But we hope you'll consider making a one-time or ongoing contribution of any size at vice.com/contribute. Every contribution, no matter how big or small, helps support the journalism Vice News brings to you every day. Thank you.